Each and every one of you in this room has heard about the genocide that happened in Rwanda. In that fateful year in 1994, as reported by SurvivorsFund.org, 800,000 to 1 million Tutsis were systematically slaughtered in their own country. Over the course of 100 days, 500,000 women were raped. 2.8 million people were displaced from their lands in which they'd been for generations, and approximately 8,000 people were killed every single day. The memory of this genocide haunts the eyes of the international community, as it is an example of the egregious failure of international powers to collectively act when people need it the most. But what if I told you that the largest, most powerful, most well-funded international humanitarian organization in the world was on the ground when this tragedy happened? What if I told you that the United Nations, with their blue helmets, their personnel, their tanks, and their guns, sat by, idly, doing nothing to help the people that died for those 100 days? The Secretary General of the United Nations in 1994, Secretary General Boutros, said in his report of the independent inquiry that, quote, "The failure by the UN to prevent and to subsequently stop the genocide in Rwanda was a failure of the United Nations system as a whole." Now, I wish I can stand up here and tell you today that something has changed, that the United Nations no longer made the mistakes that has failed a whole country and has failed 1 million people. If I told you that today, I would be lying. Because the United Nations continues to be ineffective in helping the people that need it the most, because the United Nations costs American taxpayers too much money without the representation we need, and because the UN is plagued by corruption, a change needs to happen. I propose that the United States cut the budget of the United Nations by $1 billion this fiscal year and $500 million each subsequent year until some standards are upheld that makes the United Nations an organization that can be held in high regard. Now, the United Nations started out with high hopes and dreams after the fall of the League of Nations. According to the United Nations website, it was founded on October 24th, 1945, and its mission was to bring all nations of the world together and work for peaceful development based on principles of justice, human dignity, and the well-being of all people. But right now, the United Nations, being ineffective in helping the people that are being slaughtered across the world, it is not living up to this mission standard in which it was originally founded on. Take, for example, what's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, for example, or the DRC for short. The DRC is a country in Central Africa that has been plagued by civil war for over 50 years. In the early 2000s, the United Nations sent in peacekeepers to quell the violence of the civilians that were being murdered in the Congo. But ever since the United Nations came in, nothing has happened, and there continues to be violence. In fact, the United Nations is actually hurting the people of the Congo. In an article entitled UN Congo Disaster, dated July 6, 2010, UN peacekeepers were involved in 150 sexual assaults since 2008. That's right. The UN, whose job it is to keep these people safe, are committing acts of sexual violence against the Congolese citizens. This is unacceptable. Now, as observed by Anna Mulaba, a Congolese activist and writer, she states that the UN-hired peacekeepers contribute to violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And she recounts the story of Tasha. Tasha is a 19-year-old cabbage seller that lives in the DRC. She was approached by 11 UN peacekeepers that were stationed in the Congo. She was raped, and after that, she was mutilated. That's unacceptable, and for taxpayers' money to be funding such atrocities as this. I wish I could tell you that this was not an isolated incident, and that this doesn't happen all the time. But it's increasing the numbers, and it's all because of the UN's presence and lack of oversight when it comes to its peacekeepers. Even with 20,000 troops in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, civilian deaths have gone up every single year in the Congo. That's the definition of not being effective peacekeepers. But in addition to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the UN is actually ineffective in helping other people that truly need help around the world. Because of the nature of the United Nations, with its Security Council, nations like China, nations like Russia, nations that do not necessarily have the people of the world interest in mind, are calling the shots. For example, the United Nations was stonewalled from going and passing resolutions that would have stopped Darfur by none other than China, who has significant oil interests in the Darfur region. The UN has been stonewalled by China, by Russia, when it comes to resolutions that would help in Syria, another interest that they have. The united purpose of the United Nations is to help the people that need it the most. And these countries are undermining that responsibility by putting their own economic interests above the interests of the people. And this is unacceptable. Furthermore, the United States is just spending way too much money at the United Nations. As reported by the United Nations Finance Office, the United States represents 22.5% of the UN's overall budget, and the next largest contributor comes with Japan at a mere 12.5%. According to George Russell and his article, UN Budget at $13.9 billion, dated June 7, 2010, the United States contributes $1 billion to the organization and an additional $2 billion to fund peacekeeping operations. When the United States is spending so much money for the United Nations, we do not see the results that the United States wants to do. We do not see the results that we have the money to invest to help the people that truly need it across the world. The organization is not doing its job. But in addition to this funding problem, there's also massive amounts of corruption that happens at the United Nations. According to George Halperin of the Associated Press, since 2006, 20 schemes totaling $1 billion of fraud have happened in the United Nations. But interestingly enough, even though this fraud is happening currently, the UN is currently cutting its budget for the Accountability Office. And right now, not a single case of fraud has been completed in the United Nations in the past year and a half. Not a single dollar has been recovered from all the fraudulent use of the United Nations funds. We cannot sit and let such things happen. In 2008, it was found out that $1 million was being taken every single day from a Kabul vault in which the money was supposed to be helping the citizens of Afghanistan get their lives back on track. The UN has been proven ineffective in regulating its own money and keeping accountability for all the money that the United States pours into this organization, and it's simply unacceptable. For too long have we stood idly by and we let other people in the world suffer. For too long have we spent so much money for an organization that has stopped because of interests of other countries. For too long have we stood around and turned a blind eye to the atrocities that is being committed by UN peacekeepers. Now, many people say we cannot leave the UN, and I agree with that. Leaving UN would bring the United States of America back to isolationist policies, and we want to be at the forefront of the international community. However, it's obvious that things need to change. I propose we cut the budget of the United Nations by $1 billion. Now, where's this money going to be made up? All the other nations that are contributing have to up their ante. They need to be more invested in an organization that they support. The United States is not responsible for funding a whole international organization to go around being the world police. The United Nations is United Nations. We need nations all across the world to come together for the good of the people. And the United States should not sit by, bankrolling it, and doing nothing about it. Now, I propose some savings, the savings that we do with this $1 billion, we use it to help the United Nations. With the first $250 million we'd be saving, I propose we go and insert that into the budget of the Accountability Office in the United Nations. This $250 million will be used to try to get the corruption, try to prosecute the people, and try to make sure that we can be accountable for all the people that are in the United Nations. It will take time. The next $500 million that will be saved, I propose that we put that into a source that can actually help the people now. And we put this $500 million into NATO. NATO has the forces in order to go into the countries and really help the people that need it without the stonewall countries like China and Russia, and allows the United States to actually help the people that need the help the most. And that $500 million will allow the NATO to do so. The last $250 million will be saved through the taxpayers' money. Now, the United Nations, I have a faith that it can become an organization that can truly help the people that deserve it. It has a lot of countries, a lot of resources, and it should be the preeminent force in the world to allowing people to live a good and decent life without their governments killing them, without their own citizens killing them. Everybody deserves this quality of life.